Hello, everyone. John Wayne Gacy once said that clowns can get away with murder, and for 6 years he proved it. To the people of Chicago, he was a political leader and a man of the year who stood beside the First Lady. But while he wore the paint of Pogo the Clown, a vicious secret was rotting just inches beneath his floor vents. 33 young men had been discarded like refuse in the dark earth of his crawl space. This is the story of the mask that never slipped. To understand how a monster like John Wayne Gacy could operate for 6 years without a whisper of suspicion, you must understand the world he built for himself in the 1970s. This wasn't a man lurking in the shadows of a derelict alleyway. He was a man who owned the light. By the time his vicious murder spree was in full swing, Gacy had successfully constructed a sociopath mask so thick that it became an impenetrable shield, protecting him from both the law and his neighbors. He didn't just live in a community. He was one of its primary architects. His primary tool for social leverage was the Chicago political machine. In the complex, gritty landscape of Cook County politics, John Wayne Gacy was a rising star, a Democratic precinct captain who knew how to get things done. He was the kind of man who would show up at local meetings, organize charity events, and make sure the trash was picked up on time. He was energetic, loud, and seemingly committed to the public good. The insatiable desire for control that drove his private atrocities was redirected in public toward political influence. To the party leaders, he was a reliable soldier. To the community, he was a man of authority. The absolute pinnacle of this carefully curated persona was a photograph that still chills investigators today. In 1978, Gacy stood smiling beside the First Lady of the United States, Rosalind Carter. He wore a Secret Service S pin on his lapel, a badge of trust indicating he had been cleared by federal security. It is a staggering contrast. The nation's most prolific serial killer standing inches from the president's wife. To the people of Chicago, this photo made him untouchable. When you are the man who shakes hands with the First Lady, nobody questions the strange chemical smell drifting from your floor vents. Parallel to his political power was his business, PDM Contractors. This construction firm provided the perfect logistics for a predator. It gave Gacy a legitimate reason to be seen with young men, and a legitimate reason to be seen digging in his yard or driving a work van at odd hours. PDM was more than just a source of income. It was a hunting ground. He would recruit young boys who were looking for summer work or a way to make extra cash, luring them with the promise of high wages and a path to a better life. In the eyes of parents in suburban Norwood Park, he was a mentor, a man of the year who was helping their sons find their way in a difficult economy. They didn't see a killer. They saw an employer. But the most bizarre layer of his shield was his transformation into Pogo the Clown. While other serial killers might have avoided the spotlight, Gacy embraced it with a scientific approach to his own brand. He joined a local clown club, designed his own costume, and spent his weekends performing at children's hospitals and neighborhood block parties. Psychologically, the clown persona served a dual purpose. On the surface, it made him hyper-visible, yet completely anonymous. A man in a clown suit is allowed to act strangely. He is allowed to cross physical boundaries that a regular man cannot. But on a deeper level, it was a way for Gacy to reclaim the childhood his own unsavory father had stolen from him. Hello, everyone. John Wayne Gacy once said that clowns can get away with murder, and for 6 years he proved it. To the people of Chicago, he was a political leader and a man of the year who stood beside the First Lady. But while he wore the paint of Pogo the Clown, a vicious secret was rotting just inches beneath his floor vents. 33 young men had been discarded like refuse in the dark earth of his crawlspace. This is the story of the mask that never slipped. To understand how a monster like John Wayne Gacy could operate for 6 years without a whisper of suspicion, you must understand the world he built for himself in the 1970s. This wasn't a man lurking in the shadows of a derelict alleyway. He was a man who owned the light. By the time his vicious murder spree was in full swing, Gacy had successfully constructed a sociopath mask so thick that it became an impenetrable shield, protecting him from both the law and his neighbors. He didn't just live in a community, he was one of its primary architects. His primary tool for social leverage was the Chicago political machine. In the complex, gritty landscape of Cook County politics, John Wayne Gacy was a rising star, a Democratic precinct captain who knew how to get things done. He was the kind of man who would show up at local meetings, organize charity events, and make sure the trash was picked up on time. He was energetic, loud, and seemingly committed to the public good. The insatiable desire for control that drove his private atrocities was redirected in public toward political influence. To the party leaders, he was a reliable soldier. To the community, he was a man of authority. The absolute pinnacle of this carefully curated persona was a photograph that still chills investigators today. In 1978, Gacy stood smiling beside the First Lady of the United States, Rosalind Carter. He wore a Secret Service S pin on his lapel, a badge of trust indicating he had been cleared by federal security. It is a staggering contrast. The nation's most prolific serial killer, standing inches from the president's wife. To the people of Chicago, this photo made him untouchable. When you are the man who shakes hands with the First Lady, nobody questions the strange chemical smell drifting from your floor vents. Parallel to his political power was his business, gas, PDM contractors, This construction firm provided the perfect logistics for a predator. It gave Gacy a legitimate reason to be seen with young men and a legitimate reason to be seen digging in his yard or driving a work van at odd hours. PDM was more than just a source of income. It was a hunting ground. He would recruit young boys who were looking for summer work or a way to make extra cash, luring them with the promise of high wages and a path to a better life. In the eyes of parents in suburban Norwood Park, he was a mentor, a man of the year who was helping their sons find their way in a difficult economy. They didn't see a killer. They saw an employer. But the most bizarre layer of his shield was his transformation into Pogo the Clown. While other serial killers might have avoided the spotlight, Gacy embraced it with a scientific approach to his own brand. He joined a local clown club, designed his own costume, and spent his weekends performing at children's hospitals and neighborhood block parties. Psychologically, the clown persona served a dual purpose. On the surface, it made him hyper-visible, yet completely anonymous. A man in a clown suit is allowed to act strangely. He is allowed to cross physical boundaries that a regular man cannot. But on a deeper level, it was a way for Gacy to reclaim the childhood his own unsavory father had stolen from him. In the grease paint, He wasn't the sissy his father had beaten. He was the center of attention, a figure of joy who held the power of life and death over the emotions of the room. He famously told investigators later that clowns can get away with murder, a statement that reveals his complete lack of a moral compass. To his neighbors at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue, Gacy was the life of the party. He hosted annual summer cookouts that were attended by hundreds of people. They saw a man who worked hard, played hard, and gave back to the community. They saw a model citizen in a vibrant suburb. They didn't hear the muffled cries from the crawlspace, and they didn't look too closely at the mounds of fresh dirt in the backyard. The vicious murder spree was happening just inches below their feet while they ate their burgers and laughed at his jokes. This multi-perspective reality is what makes the Gacy case a uniquely American horror story. It highlights a society so desperate for model citizens that it ignores the gruesome stories right in front of its eyes. In 1970s Chicago, John Wayne Gacy didn't just have a secret, he had a system. He had built a fortress out of respectability, and as long as he kept the mask on, the world was happy to let him lead the parade. He was the man of the year, and his shield was so perfect that it took a literal mountain of bodies to finally break it. While the world saw the mask of the clown, psychology looks at the cradle. To understand a predator like John Wayne Gacy, we must look at the vicious environment that forged him, a combination of biological bad luck and a home life defined by trauma. Psychology suggests that while some are born with the wiring of a sociopath, it is the nurture that often loads the gun. The primary architect of Gacy's fractured psyche was his father, John Stanley Gacy. He was a man described as a vicious alcoholic, a decorated war veteran who ruled his home with a belt and a constant stream of verbal abuse. For the young, John Demes, childhood was not a sanctuary. It was a battlefield where he was always on the losing side. His father had an insatiable desire for a son who fit a traditional mold of masculinity, athletic, tough, and unemotional. Gacy, however, was a sickly child with a heart condition that prevented him from playing sports. This failure to meet his father's expectations led to a lifetime of humiliation. John Stanley Gacy would frequently call his son stupid, useless, or most damagingly, a sissy. He would compare John Darcy unfavorably to his sisters, creating a deep-seated resentment and a desperate, almost pathological need for male approval. This dynamic is a classic marker in the development of unsavory characters. The boy grew up both loathing his father and obsessively trying to win his respect, a conflict that would later manifest in his choice of victims. He didn't just want to be a man, he wanted to dominate men. Nature contributed its own sinister blow when Gacy was 11 years old. While playing on a swing set, he was struck in the head by the heavy wooden seat. The injury was severe, leading to a blood clot in his brain that went undiagnosed for years. This caused him to suffer from blackout spells and fainting fits throughout his adolescence. Modern forensic neurology often points to such traumatic brain injuries as a catalyst for behavioral deviance. In Gacy's case, it added a layer of physical instability to an already crumbling emotional foundation. As he entered his 20s, John Wayne Gacy sought a fresh start in the neon desert of Las Vegas. It was here that his insatiable desire for the macabre first began to surface. While working at a mortuary, Gacy found himself in a world of silence and death, a place where he held total control. He would later admit to a gruesome curiosity, even claiming he once climbed into a coffin to embrace a young male corpse. This necrophilic tendency suggests that his sexual development was already spiraling into a dark, deviant territory where power was synonymous with the absence of life. However, the world didn't see a necrophile. They saw an extraordinary young man on the rise. After moving to Waterloo, Iowa in the mid-1960s, Gacy began constructing the first version of his Sociopath Mask. He managed 3 KFC franchises for his father-in-law and became a leader in the Jaycees, a junior chamber of commerce. He was named Man of the Year in his local chapter, a title he would wear like armor. This was the scientific approach to social manipulation. Build enough public credit that no one looks at the private debt. But the mask slipped in 1967. Gacy was arrested for a sexual assault against a teenage employee named Donald Voorhees. He was sentenced to 10 years for sodomy. This should have been the end of his story. But here is the twist in the narrative. Gacy applied the same manipulation he used in the Jaycees to the prison system. He became a model prisoner. He worked in the kitchen, organized activities, and convinced the parole board that he was a reformed man. In a spectacular failure of the justice system, he was released after serving only 18 months of a 10-year sentence. This early release didn't reform him. It validated him. It taught him that his mask was effective, even against the law. He returned to Chicago with a clean slate and an emboldened sense of superiority. The genesis was complete. The sissy boy had been beaten, broken, and physically damaged. But the man who emerged was a calculated predator who had learned exactly how to exploit the world's desire for model citizens. By the time he reached the suburbs of Chicago, the gun was loaded, the safety was off, and he was ready to begin his sinister hunt for the 33 young men who would never come home. To the casual observer driving through Norwood Park in the mid-1970s, 82E13, West Somerdale Avenue was nothing more than a symbol of the quiet American dream. It was a well-maintained ranch-style house, framed by a neat lawn and occupied by a man who was, by all accounts, the perfect neighbor. But for the young men who crossed that threshold, this ordinary suburban home was a meticulously engineered slaughterhouse. To understand the vicious murder spree of John Wayne Gacy, we must analyze the mechanics of his deception, the handcuff illusion, and the rope trick that allowed him to commit atrocities in total silence. He didn't just hunt his victims. He invited them into his world under the guise of opportunity and safety. The primary method of luring was as clever as it was sinister. Using the reputation of PDM contractors, Gacy would frequent the Greyhound bus terminals and parks of Chicago, looking for young men who appeared to be adrift. He wasn't searching for unsavory characters or the dregs of society. He was looking for the vulnerable and the hopeful. He would present himself as a successful businessman, a man of the year, and offer them immediate work. He promised $20 or $30 for a few hours of light labor, a fortune for a runaway in 1972. To these boys, Gacy looked like a guardian angel, a way to escape the harsh streets of the city. He would drive them back to his suburban sanctuary, offer them a cold beer, and engage them in a friendly job interview that was actually a vicious assessment of their strength and submission. Then came the handcuff illusion, the moment the sociopath mask truly began to slip. Gacy would produce a pair of high-quality steel handcuffs, claiming they were part of his professional clown act or a police souvenir. With a scientific approach to manipulation, he would demonstrate how to escape them, making the act look like a harmless parlor trick. He would then invite the young man to try them on, playfully challenging them to see if they could figure out the mechanism. "It's all about the leverage," he would say in his authoritative tone. But the moment the metal teeth clicked shut, the game was over. The victim would realize with a surge of adrenaline and terror that these were not stage props. They were real. They were locked, and Gacy had the only key. The vicious murder was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. Once the victim was immobilized, Gacy would unleash his insatiable desire for dominance through what he called the rope trick. This was not a quick or merciful death. He used a garrote, a length of nylon rope and a wooden handle, to perform a slow, controlled strangulation. This technique was a masterpiece of malevolent cruelty. By tightening and then slightly loosening the rope, Gacy could prolong the agony, watching the life flicker in the victim's eyes like a dying candle. This method left no bloodstains to clean, no loud noises to alert the neighbors, and no physical marks that could be easily seen from a distance. While the rest of Summerdale Avenue watched television or slept, Gacy was refining the gruesome stories of his victims in the absolute silence of his guest room. He was a man who had perfected the art of the vicious murder, and as the body of Timothy McCoy became the first of many, he prepared for the second half of his grisly labor, the burial. Murder on this scale is a logistical nightmare that requires a specialized graveyard, and for John Wayne Gacy, that graveyard was literally beneath his feet. The crawl space of his home, a low-ceilinged, dirt-floored void designed for plumbing access, was transformed into what forensic investigators would later call a crawl space cathedral. In a malevolent display of cold-blooded logic, yes, Gacy treated this 4-foot-deep space as a warehouse for his merchandise. He didn't just dump the bodies, he managed them. He would crawl into the humid, claustrophobic darkness, sometimes still wearing his work clothes, and dig shallow trenches in the gray Chicago clay to hide the gruesome stories of his crimes. He spent hours in that darkness, illuminated only by a single work lamp, carefully placing his victims in the earth. The organization of the crawl space was chillingly methodical. Forensic analysis would later reveal that Gacy buried his victims in a series of layers, often fitting them together like a dark puzzle to maximize every square inch of the dirt. He used a scientific approach to deal with the inevitable byproduct of mass murder, the smell of decay. To mask the cold-blooded scent that threatened to expose him, he dumped hundreds of pounds of quicklime and limestone over the remains. For years, this malevolent system worked. He hosted massive summer cookouts and political meetings directly above 26 decomposing bodies. Guests would laugh and eat just inches away from the victims, never suspecting that the man of the year was walking on a floor of bones. But even a crawlspace cathedral has a saturation point. By the late 1970s, the earth beneath 8213 West Summerdale Avenue had become a toxic slurry of bone, chemical, and stagnant water. The limestone was no longer enough to contain the insatiable reality of 33 murders. A sweet, cloying, and gruesome odor began to seep through the floor vents, filling the house with the scent of a crypt. When neighbors or his wife questioned the smell, Gacy used his authoritative persona to dismiss it as a plumbing issue or a sewage backup. But privately, he knew he had run out of room. The crawl space was full, and the vicious murder spree was now forced into a new, more dangerous phase of disposal. This logistical crisis led Gacy to the Des Plaines River. He began driving his black work van to the I-55 bridge in the dead of night, heaving the weighted bodies of his final victims over the concrete railing and into the dark water. This transition from invisible burial to public disposal was the first sign of his decaying caution. He believed the river would carry his secrets to the Gulf of Mexico, just as the crawl space had hidden them for 6 years. He was a sociopath who believed his scientific approach had made him a god, untouchable by the laws of man or nature. He had successfully hidden 33 gruesome stories from a world that was too blinded by his mask to look down. The geography of death was finally breached in December 1978. When investigators finally entered that dark void, they were met with a sight that redefined the realm of forensic science. They didn't find a mass grave. They found a gruesome map of one man's insatiable desire. They had to use screwdrivers and small trowels to excavate the remains, one bone at a time, under the glare of floodlights and the weight of an unbearable atmosphere. Each victim recovered from the crawl space was a gruesome testament to the failure of the world to see the monster behind the mask. The Man of the Year had built a monument to his own depravity, and as the last of the 33 bodies was pulled from the earth, the world finally looked beneath the feet of the clown. The most haunting question of the John Wayne Gacy case isn't just how a man could murder 33 people. It is why 33 young men were allowed to vanish without a national outcry. To understand this systemic failure, we have to look at the cold-blooded hierarchy of victims in 1970s America. Investigators and social historians often refer to a chilling concept known as blue dross. In the eyes of the law at the time, certain lives simply didn't carry the same weight as others. The unsavory characters of the streets, the runaways, the throwaway kids, and the young men of the underground gay community, were seen as disposable. Gacy didn't just understand his victims, he understood the apathy of the system that was supposed to protect them. During this era, Chicago was a city struggling with a massive influx of runaway youth. The cultural shift of the 70s meant thousands of teenagers were heading to big cities in search of freedom or a fresh start. When one of these boys went missing, the police response was often a shrug of the shoulders. The prevailing scientific approach to missing persons at the time was to assume they had simply gone to California or joined a commune. They were labeled as problem children or drifters. To the authorities, they weren't victims of a vicious murder spree. They were just another administrative headache that would eventually resolve itself when the kid got hungry and called home. This indifference created a hunting ground where Gacy could operate with near total impunity. He targeted those who existed on the margins, boys who were already estranged from their families, or those who were terrified that their insatiable desire for same-sex companionship would lead to social ruin if they went to the police. Gacy used this fear as a weapon. He knew that if a boy from a good family went missing, the sirens would wail. But if a hustler or a street kid disappeared from a bus terminal, the world would keep turning. This was the vicious logic of the predator. He chose the invisible. The multi-perspective tragedy here is found in the voices of the families who were ignored. For years, parents like Mr. Gilroy and the mothers of the missing boys pleaded with the Chicago police to take their cases seriously. They provided descriptions, last known locations, and even pointed toward the cold-blooded rumors of a contractor in a black van. But the response was consistently dismissive. He's 18. He can do what he wants. Or, he probably just didn't want to say goodbye. The gap between a mother's intuition and the cold bureaucracy of the police was a void where Gacy hid 33 gruesome stories. The system didn't just fail these families, it effectively silenced them, allowing the Man of the Year to maintain his mask while the crawlspace continued to fill. Everything changed on December 11th, 1978. The cold-blooded cycle of indifference was finally broken by a 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest. Unlike many of the previous victims, Robert was the ideal victim in the eyes of the 1970s social order. He was a high-achieving student with a steady job at a local pharmacy, a good boy from a stable middle-class family in Des Plaines. He didn't have a history of running away, and he wasn't part of the unsavory street life. When he vanished after telling his mother he was going to talk to a contractor about a holiday job, the scientific approach of the police shifted instantly. The disappearance of Robert Piest wasn't treated as a runaway case. It was treated as a crisis. Because he came from a demographic that the system actually valued, the Des Plaines Police Department didn't wait 48 hours to start an investigation. They went to the pharmacy, they interviewed witnesses, and they found a name: John Wayne Gacy. This was the moment the sociopath mask met a force it couldn't manipulate. The contrast is agonizing. If the same level of urgency had been applied to the first 32 victims, the vicious murder spree would have ended years earlier. The investigation into the Piest case exposed the gruesome reality of Blue Dross. It forced the public to realize that a monster had been thriving in the cracks of their own prejudice, while the insatiable desire for justice finally led the police to 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. It also highlighted a vicious truth about American society. We only look for the lost when we decide their lives are worth finding. The silence of the vanished was finally broken, but it took a perfect victim to make the world hear the screams coming from the crawlspace. The trial of John Wayne Gacy was more than just a legal proceeding. It was the final deconstruction of the most successful mask in criminal history. His defense team attempted to shield him behind the vicious plea of insanity, arguing that multiple personalities were at war within his psyche. They claimed he was a victim of his own mind, unable to control the insatiable desire that fueled the spree. But the prosecution countered with a clinical, scientific approach. They argued that a man who meticulously organizes 26 bodies in a crawlspace cathedral and uses quicklime to mask the scent of decay is not insane. He is calculated. He is methodical. He is a predator who understands the law perfectly and exactly how to circumvent it. The jury agreed. In March 1980, they returned 33 guilty verdicts, sentencing the killer clown to death. During his 14 years on death row, Gacy continued to exploit the public's insatiable desire for gruesome stories. He turned to oil painting, creating haunting images of clowns and skulls that are still traded by collectors of the macabre today. These works are a final disturbing testament to his ego. Even in the shadow of the gallows, he was still performing. The end finally came on May 10th, 1994. There were no tears, no apologies, and no remorse. When asked for his final words, he delivered a defiant punchline that echoed the vicious nature of his life. Kiss my ass. The house at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue is gone, but the dark legacy of the crawlspace remains. This case changed how we value the lives of the Blue Dross and forced a new era of forensic awareness. Yet, one haunting question lingers. Was John Wayne Gacy a unique monster, or simply the most successful at wearing a mask of respectability that we are all too willing to believe? Tell us in the comments if you believe justice was truly served for the 33 souls he silenced. Goodbye, everyone.